I always believed the worst kind of betrayal was the one you never saw coming until it was already too late. My name is Helen Brooks. I am 69 years old, and for more than 40 years I lived in the same white two-story house on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio. My late husband and I raised our only son there. Every birthday candle, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee, every graduation photograph, and every family dinner became part of those walls. After my husband passed away 8 years earlier, the house became more than a place to live. It became the last piece of the life we had built together. I never imagined I would lose it while my own son smiled and told me everything was fine. The morning everything changed began like any other Tuesday. I woke up just after 6 o'clock, watered the flowers on my front porch, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and wrote a grocery list before leaving for the bank. The roof over the garage had started leaking after several days of heavy rain, and the contractor wanted a deposit before beginning repairs. I had enough savings to cover the work without worrying about my monthly budget. I had spent decades saving carefully, never buying anything extravagant, believing financial security was one of the greatest gifts I could leave behind. As I drove across town, I found myself smiling because Ryan had called the night before. He sounded excited about his wedding to Olivia, talking about flower arrangements, music, and how beautiful the ceremony would be. Hearing happiness in my son's voice always made me happy too. I even wondered if I should surprise the young couple with a slightly larger wedding gift than I had originally planned. When my turn came at the bank, I handed my identification to the young teller and politely asked to withdraw $20,000. She typed quietly for a few seconds before her expression changed. She looked back at the screen, then at me, as though she believed something must be wrong. Miss Brooks, she said carefully. Would you mind waiting just a moment while I ask my manager to assist you? I nodded without concern. I assumed they simply needed additional authorization because of the amount. A few minutes later, the branch manager invited me into his office. He closed the door gently before taking a seat across from me. His voice was kind, but the words that followed no longer belonged to the ordinary morning I had expected. Mrs. Brooks, according to our records, your primary account was closed several days ago. The remaining balance was transferred after authorized withdrawal requests. I stared at him without speaking. I smiled politely because I honestly believed he had confused me with another customer. That cannot be right, I answered softly. I have never requested anything like that. He slowly turned his computer monitor toward me. My account number was correct. My name was correct. The balance was not. Every dollar I had spent decades saving was gone. I asked him to print every transaction because there had to be some mistake. He quietly agreed. As I walked back to my car holding a thick envelope filled with bank records, I felt strangely calm, almost numb. My mind searched desperately for simple explanations. Perhaps there had been fraud. Perhaps the bank had made a terrible error. Perhaps everything would be corrected before the day ended. I drove home repeating those possibilities to myself, refusing to believe anything else. Then I turned onto my street. At first I noticed several unfamiliar vehicles parked near my driveway. A man wearing a bright safety vest measured the front yard, while another photographed the exterior of my house. My heart began beating faster. I parked across the street and stepped out slowly. That was when I saw the large white sign planted firmly beside my mailbox. Sold. The word seemed unreal, as though it belonged to someone else's life. I crossed the street with trembling hands and asked one of the workers what was happening. He smiled politely and replied, "The new owners asked us to begin the inspection this afternoon." New owners. I looked back at the home where I had lived for nearly half a century. Every curtain and every window was exactly where I had left it that morning. My flower pots still lined the porch. My husband's wind chime still moved gently in the breeze. Nothing looked different except for that single sign. I reached into my purse searching for my cellular phone because there was only one person I wanted to call. Before I pressed Ryan's number, I noticed a folded envelope tucked beneath my front door. My name was written across the front in my son's handwriting. I stood on the front porch for several long moments with Ryan's envelope still unopened in my hands. Around me, strangers walked across the lawn carrying clipboards and measuring tapes, as though the house no longer belonged to me. One of the workers politely asked whether I needed a few minutes before they continued their inspection. I nodded without answering because I could not find the words. Somehow my own front yard had become the only unfamiliar place in my life. I finally unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. My reading glasses rested beside the newspaper. A half-finished crossword puzzle remained on the kitchen table. My favorite blue coffee mug still sat in the sink, waiting to be washed. The ordinary details made everything feel even more impossible. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. Mom, I know you will not understand right now, but I did what was best for all of us. Please trust me. We will talk soon. Love, Ryan. I read those sentences 3 times, hoping another page might fall out with an explanation. There was nothing else. No legal documents. No address. No reason why my savings had disappeared or why people outside believed my home belonged to someone else. I folded the note carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I did something that surprised even me. I did not call Ryan. I did not leave an angry message. I did not drive to his apartment. If the past had taught me anything, it was that people rarely tell the truth when they believe emotions are stronger than facts. I wanted facts. My cellular phone rang before I even sat down. Ryan's smiling photograph appeared on the screen. For a brief second, I considered ignoring the call, but instead I answered in the same calm voice I had always used. Hello, sweetheart. Hi, Mom, he said cheerfully. I tried stopping by earlier, but you were already gone. Did you get my note? I looked around the living room, where every family photograph suddenly seemed to belong to another lifetime. Yes, I answered quietly. I found it. Good, he replied with obvious relief. I know this probably looks confusing, but everything is under control. I promise I will explain soon. I waited. He did not offer another word. Finally, I asked, how are the wedding plans coming? He laughed softly. Everything is finally falling into place. Olivia is so excited. You are going to love the venue. His excitement sounded genuine, almost innocent. There was no hesitation in his voice, no sign that anything unusual had happened. If I had not spent the morning at the bank or seen the large sold sign in my front yard, I might have believed we were having an ordinary conversation between a mother and her son. That sounds wonderful, I said. I am happy for both of you. We spoke for another minute about the weather and his work before ending the call. He never mentioned my bank account. He never mentioned the house. He simply wished me a good afternoon and said he loved me. After the call ended, I remained seated in complete silence. The contrast between his cheerful voice and the reality surrounding me felt almost impossible to understand. Late that afternoon, my next-door neighbor, Susan Miller, knocked gently on the door carrying a casserole dish. She smiled warmly before noticing my expression. Helen, are you feeling all right? She asked. I forced a small smile and invited her inside. As we talked in the kitchen, she casually mentioned seeing several moving trucks scheduled to arrive later that week. I assumed Ryan had already told you everything, she said. I looked directly at her. What exactly do you mean? Susan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Well, everyone at church has been talking about how generous you were. They said you sold the house so Ryan and Olivia could have their dream wedding before you moved into a retirement community closer to them. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. Who told people that? Susan looked genuinely puzzled. Ryan did. He said it was your idea. I thanked her for bringing dinner and walked her to the front door with the same quiet politeness I had shown for years. Once she left, I locked the door, walked back into the living room, and looked at the framed photograph of Ryan as a little boy sitting on his father's shoulders. I realized then that someone had been telling a story about my life without ever asking me to be part of it, and if I wanted the truth, I would have to stop listening to explanations and start following every signature, every document, and every decision made in my name. The following morning I woke before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to rest. The house was unusually quiet, yet every room seemed to hold questions I could no longer ignore. I made coffee the same way I had every morning for decades, carried the mug to the dining room, and spread the bank statements across the table beside Ryan's handwritten note. I looked at every transaction one more time, paying close attention to dates instead of dollar amounts. The withdrawals had not happened all at once. They had been made gradually over several months, each one just small enough that I had never noticed because I rarely checked the balance. After my husband passed away, I trusted my son whenever he offered to help me organize bills, update online banking, or manage paperwork that seemed increasingly complicated. I had believed he was making life easier for me. Now I wondered how many times I had signed something without reading every page because I trusted the person sitting across the table. By 8 o'clock, I was standing inside the county recorder's office requesting every document connected to my property. The clerk greeted me politely and asked for my address. After a few minutes of searching, she printed several pages and handed them to me with a friendly smile, assuming I was simply collecting personal records. I thanked her and sat in the public waiting area to read them carefully. My heart sank as I reached the final page. According to the official records, the property had already been transferred to a new owner the previous week. The sale appeared complete. Every required signature seemed to be present. My name was printed clearly beside a signature that looked almost identical to my own. I traced the letters with my finger. At first glance it resembled my handwriting, but something felt wrong. The final stroke of my last name curved differently than I had written it for more than 40 years. It was close enough to fool a stranger, but not close enough to fool me. I requested certified copies of every document before quietly leaving the building. My next stop was the title company listed on the paperwork. A receptionist welcomed me into a small conference room while an employee searched for the transaction file. After reviewing the records, he explained that all required documents had been submitted properly and that a family representative had assisted throughout the process. Family representative? I asked gently. He nodded. Your son attended several appointments. Everything appeared to be in order. I thanked him for his time without revealing how little I actually knew. As I walked back to my car, I realized something important. Ryan had not acted impulsively. This had taken planning, appointments, paperwork, and repeated visits over many weeks. Nothing about it had happened by accident. That afternoon, I returned home and unlocked the small filing cabinet in my study. Inside were folders my husband had carefully labeled years earlier. Insurance policies, tax returns, retirement statements, property records. I noticed several folders had recently been rearranged. One folder containing older power of attorney paperwork had been removed entirely. I searched every drawer twice before accepting that it was gone. While I stood there, my cellular phone vibrated. Ryan had sent a cheerful photograph of himself and Olivia tasting wedding cakes, followed by a short message. Everything is coming together perfectly. Cannot wait for you to see it. I stared at the smiling faces on the screen for several seconds before locking the phone without replying. For the first time in my life, I understood that photographs could capture happiness while hiding the truth behind them. I gathered every document I had collected that day into a single envelope and wrote one sentence across the front in blue ink. Facts before feelings. As I placed the envelope inside my purse, I realized I was no longer searching for an explanation. I was building a timeline, and every signature, every transfer, and every missing document pointed in exactly the same direction. Before I confronted my son, I intended to know more about what had happened than anyone else involved. The next piece of the truth arrived when I stopped asking where the money had gone and started asking what it had paid for. 2 mornings later, I drove across town to the luxury hotel where Ryan and Olivia had chosen to hold their wedding reception. I did not go inside. Instead, I sat quietly in my car across the street watching employees carry floral arrangements through the front entrance while delivery trucks unloaded expensive decorations. A large banner near the ballroom welcomed another wedding party scheduled for that weekend. And for a moment, I imagined how excited Ryan must have felt planning every detail of his own celebration. I wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding that would explain everything. Then I remembered the empty bank account, the forged signature, and the sold sign standing in my front yard. Hope could no longer replace evidence. Before leaving, I walked into the hotel lobby and politely asked whether someone could provide information about booking events because my church occasionally hosted charity dinners. The event coordinator welcomed me warmly and showed me brochures describing ballroom packages, premium catering, custom lighting, live entertainment, and luxury guest accommodations. As she spoke, she casually mentioned that one of their largest upcoming weddings had reserved nearly every premium service available. She smiled proudly while describing the elegant celebration planned by Ryan Brooks and Olivia Turner. My heart remained steady even as every detail confirmed what I already suspected. The flowers, the orchestra, the gourmet dinner, the imported desserts, the professional photographers, and the honeymoon suite all represented a level of spending my son could never have afforded on his own salary. I thanked the coordinator for her time and quietly left the building carrying only the brochure she had handed me. My next stop was a travel agency a few blocks away. Months earlier, Ryan had mentioned wanting to take Olivia somewhere tropical after the wedding. I remembered the conversation because he laughed and said it was only a dream unless they won the lottery. The travel consultant recognized their reservation immediately after I mentioned Ryan's name. Believing I was simply confirming family arrangements, she happily described a 2-week honeymoon at an exclusive Caribbean resort with oceanfront accommodations, private excursions, and first-class airfare. She even complimented my son for choosing such a memorable experience. I smiled politely while silently calculating the cost in my mind. Every destination, every upgrade, every luxury reflected money that had once been sitting safely inside the savings account my husband and I had built together over 4 decades. That afternoon, I parked outside a small coffee shop where Ryan had asked me to meet him several weeks earlier to discuss wedding invitations. I remembered paying for lunch while he apologized for struggling with expenses. He promised he and Olivia were keeping everything modest because starting a marriage without debt mattered more than appearances. I believed every word because honesty had never seemed optional in our family. Now those memories returned carrying entirely different meaning. I drove home through neighborhoods already decorated for autumn, watching children ride bicycles and neighbors rake colorful leaves into neat piles. Ordinary life continued exactly as it always had while mine quietly unraveled beneath the surface. When I reached my house, another inspection vehicle sat in the driveway. A friendly representative greeted me and explained he needed one final appraisal before closing documents were fully completed for the new owners. I thanked him politely, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside once more. The living room walls still displayed photographs from Ryan's childhood, including one where he proudly held the first baseball glove his father had given him. I stood there for several minutes looking at that smiling little boy, wondering where the years had gone and how love had somehow become permission to make decisions about another person's life without asking. I carried my growing stack of documents into the study and added the hotel brochure beside the property records and bank statements. Piece by piece, the timeline became impossible to ignore. My savings had not simply disappeared. They had been transformed into chandeliers, flowers, fine china, elegant music, luxury travel, and a wedding that everyone admired without knowing whose life had quietly paid for it. As painful as that realization was, it also gave me something I had not possessed since the day I saw the sold sign in my yard. It gave me clarity, and clarity would become far more valuable than anger in the days that followed. The hardest part about discovering the truth was not finding the documents. It was accepting that the person behind them was the same little boy I had once carried into this house on my shoulders. For several nights after learning about the wedding expenses, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, receipts, and notes, trying to understand when everything had changed. I kept returning to the same question. How could someone I loved so deeply believe they had the right to make decisions about my life without asking me? I decided that before I confronted Ryan, I needed to understand exactly what he believed he was doing. Anger could wait. The truth could not. The next morning, I called my son and asked if he would meet me for coffee. My voice remained calm because I did not want him to know how much I already understood. "Of course, Mom," he said warmly. "I have been meaning to check on you anyway." We met at a small cafe near his office, the same place where we had celebrated his promotion years earlier. Ryan walked in wearing a suit, smiling confidently, and carrying his phone in his hand. He looked exactly like the successful young man I had always hoped he would become. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things. His work, the wedding, the weather. I watched him, carefully, searching for any sign that he understood the seriousness of what had happened. There was none. Finally, I placed my coffee cup down and asked, "Ryan, can you explain something to me?" He looked concerned, but not surprised. "Sure, Mom. What is it?" I took a slow breath. "Why did you tell people I agreed to sell my house?" His expression changed immediately. It was not fear. It was calculation, like someone quickly deciding which words to choose. "Mom, I knew you would be upset at first, but I thought once you understood everything, you would see that it was the right decision." I listened quietly. "The right decision for who?" I asked. He looked away for a moment. "For everyone." Those 2 words told me more than any document could have. Ryan believed he had made a choice on my behalf because he convinced himself he knew what was best. He explained that the wedding had become more expensive than expected and that he and Olivia felt pressure to create a special celebration. He said they thought the house was too large for me now that I lived alone. He said moving closer to them would give me more support and allow everyone to be together more often. Every sentence sounded reasonable when heard separately. That was what made it so painful. A person could wrap selfish decisions inside words that sounded caring. "Did you ever ask me if I wanted to move?" I asked. Ryan became quiet. "No," he admitted, "but I thought you would understand eventually." I looked at my son sitting across from me and remembered the years when he was the one asking me to make decisions for him. I remembered school projects, first jobs, difficult moments, and every time he needed guidance. I had always told him that adulthood meant accepting responsibility for your choices. Somehow he had forgotten that lesson when the choice involved me. Before leaving, I asked one final question. "Ryan, when did you decide that my house was yours to use?" His face softened slightly. "Mom, I never thought of it that way. But I knew he had. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe not with cruelty. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me as the owner of my own life and started seeing me as a problem he could solve." I returned home that afternoon carrying no new documents, no new evidence, and no confession. But I had learned something more important. Ryan was not hiding because he thought he had done something wrong. He was hiding because he believed his intentions mattered more than my permission. That was the moment I stopped hoping for an apology and started preparing for the conversation where every fact would finally have to speak for itself. The morning after my conversation with Ryan, I stopped waiting for him to change his mind. Instead, I began preparing for what came next. I had spent enough days searching for explanations. From that point forward, I would focus only on facts. Richard, the financial advisor my late husband and I had trusted for years, agreed to meet me that afternoon. He welcomed me into his office with genuine concern after hearing only a few details over the telephone. I placed the growing stack of documents on his desk without saying a word. The bank statements, the certified property records, copies of the transfer documents, and Ryan's handwritten note rested neatly in front of him. Richard reviewed each page carefully, occasionally adjusting his glasses before moving to the next document. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and remained silent for several moments. "Helen," he finally said, "there are far too many inconsistencies here to ignore." I nodded quietly. "I am not interested in revenge," I answered. "I only want to understand exactly what happened and make sure nothing else can disappear without my knowledge." Richard appreciated that answer. He explained that before discussing possible legal options, I needed to protect everything that remained under my control. Together we reviewed every account that still carried my name. I updated passwords that had remained unchanged for years, removed automatic access wherever possible, and arranged for future retirement deposits to be directed into a newly secured account. None of those changes affected Ryan immediately, but they ensured that no additional decisions could be made without my knowledge. Richard then recommended someone he trusted completely, attorney James Collins, who specialized in estate planning and property matters involving older adults. The following morning, I met James in a modest office overlooking the courthouse square. He listened patiently while I described every event from the empty bank account to the sold sign in my front yard. I expected surprise, but instead he listened with the calm expression of someone who understood that complicated family situations often unfolded quietly rather than dramatically. After reviewing the documents, James spoke carefully. "Helen, before we discuss solutions, we need to establish one complete timeline. Every meeting, every signature, every transaction, every conversation. Facts are much stronger when they stand together." Those words stayed with me. For the next several hours, we organized every document by date. Patterns began appearing almost immediately. Bank withdrawals matched appointments at the title company. Property paperwork appeared shortly after transfers from my savings account. Ryan's meetings, electronic authorizations, and financial activity fit together with remarkable consistency. Nothing looked accidental. Everything suggested planning over many months. James also noticed something I had overlooked. Several signatures supposedly completed on different dates appeared almost identical, even though genuine handwritten signatures naturally change slightly each time a person signs. He suggested obtaining independent handwriting analysis if necessary, but reminded me not to reach conclusions before gathering every available record. His approach reassured me because it reflected exactly what I wanted. I was not trying to build accusations. I was building certainty. Before leaving his office, James advised me to keep every interaction with Ryan calm and ordinary. Do not argue, he said. Do not reveal everything you know. Let the documents speak when the time is right. I agreed immediately because anger had never brought clarity into anyone's life. That evening, Ryan called again, excitedly asking whether I had chosen a dress for the wedding. I smiled even though he could not see me. Not yet, I replied gently. There is still plenty of time. He laughed and began describing flower arrangements and seating charts as though our family stood on perfectly solid ground. I listened quietly, realizing that while he believed the wedding represented the beginning of his future, I was preparing for a conversation that would determine whether our family had any future at all. After we ended the call, I placed every document into a new leather binder James had given me. On the inside cover, I wrote a sentence my husband often repeated whenever life became difficult. Truth does not become weaker simply because it waits. I closed the binder, placed it beside the framed photograph of our family taken years earlier on Thanksgiving, and understood that I was no longer collecting evidence out of fear. I was preserving the truth with patience, because when the right moment finally arrived, I wanted every decision to rest on facts instead of emotion. The wedding weekend arrived beneath a clear October sky, and the entire town seemed eager to celebrate Ryan and Olivia's new beginning. Every hotel entrance was decorated with fresh white flowers, polished lanterns, and elegant ribbons that fluttered gently in the afternoon breeze. Guests arrived smiling, carrying beautifully wrapped gifts while photographers moved quietly from one perfect moment to the next. Looking around, no one would have guessed that beneath the laughter and congratulations rested months of hidden decisions that had changed another person's life without permission. I parked my car a short distance from the venue and remained inside for several minutes before stepping out. Beside me on the passenger seat rested the brown leather binder attorney James Collins and I had assembled together. Inside were certified property records, bank statements, transaction histories, title documents, copies of signatures, timelines, and every piece of evidence arranged in precise chronological order. I picked up the binder, closed my car door, and walked toward the ballroom with the same quiet confidence I had carried throughout the previous weeks. The receptionist welcomed me warmly and directed me toward the private dining room where family members had gathered. Before the evening reception, Ryan spotted me almost immediately. His face lit up with the same smile I had seen since he was a little boy running toward me after school. "Mom," he said happily, wrapping me in a gentle hug. "I am so glad you made it." I hugged him back just as warmly. "I would not have missed your wedding weekend," I answered honestly. That much was true. Despite everything that had happened, I still loved my son. Love, however, no longer required silence. Olivia approached wearing a simple white rehearsal dress, thanking me for coming and asking whether I liked the decorations. I complimented the beautiful flowers and elegant ballroom, and for a few moments our conversation sounded exactly like any other family gathering. Relatives introduced themselves to distant cousins. Friends laughed near the dessert table. Soft piano music filled the room. Watching everyone celebrate, I understood how easily appearances could persuade people that everything was exactly as it should be. During dinner, Ryan stood several times to greet guests arriving late. Each time he walked away, I quietly observed the room. No one looked suspicious. No one whispered nervously. They all believed they were witnessing the beginning of a joyful marriage built upon years of careful planning and hard work. Only I knew how many missing pieces remained hidden beneath the polished surface. At one point, Ryan returned to my table, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling cider. He handed one to me with an affectionate smile. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for supporting us. I know the last few weeks have probably felt confusing, but after the wedding, everything will finally settle down." I looked directly into his eyes before answering. "Yes, Ryan. After the wedding, everything will finally become very clear." He smiled, apparently comforted by my response, never realizing that we attached entirely different meanings to the same sentence. A little later, attorney James Collins quietly entered the ballroom through a side entrance, dressed in a dark suit that blended naturally with the other guests. We exchanged only a brief glance. Nothing more was necessary. He took a seat near the back of the room exactly as we had planned. He was not there to create a scene. He was there because truth deserved careful witnesses. As the rehearsal dinner continued, family members began discussing tomorrow's ceremony, the reception schedule, and who would offer the traditional wedding toast. Ryan proudly announced that before dessert, he wanted to thank everyone who had supported him throughout his life. Guests applauded enthusiastically. I gently rested one hand on the leather binder beside my chair. The room remained filled with laughter, conversation, and celebration, yet inside that binder rested a completely different story, waiting patiently to be heard. For weeks, I had resisted anger, gathered facts, and allowed every document to speak more clearly than my emotions ever could. Now the moment was approaching when those quiet pages would finally be opened in front of the people who mattered most. I took a slow breath, looked around the beautifully decorated ballroom one final time, and realized that everyone believed this evening would be remembered for a wedding. By the time the first toast ended, it would also be remembered as the night the truth finally stepped into the light. Ryan stood near the center of the ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling cider as the room gradually became quiet. He smiled proudly at the friends and relatives who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with him. Olivia stood beside him with tears of happiness in her eyes, while soft music faded into the background. Before we enjoy dessert, Ryan began, I just want to thank everyone who helped us reach this wonderful day. Warm applause filled the room. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on the leather binder beside my chair. Every page inside had been carefully organized. Every date had been verified. Every document had been copied. I felt no anger, only a deep sense of certainty. Ryan thanked his co-workers, Olivia's parents, old college friends, and several family members who had supported the wedding. Finally, he looked toward me with a grateful smile. Most of all, he said, I want to thank my mother. She has always taught me to believe in family, generosity, and unconditional love. More applause followed. I slowly stood before the sound had completely faded. The room became quiet again, expecting me to offer a mother's blessing. Ryan smiled warmly. Mom, would you like to say a few words? I nodded gently. Yes, I replied. I would. I walked to the front of the room, carrying the leather binder. James Collins quietly stood near the back without drawing attention to himself. I placed the binder on a small table beside Ryan and looked around the ballroom. Every face waited patiently. Family has always meant everything to me. I began. For 40 years, my late husband and I worked hard to build a home where love and honesty mattered more than money. We believed trust was the greatest gift parents could give their children. The room remained completely silent. I opened the binder and removed the first document. Several weeks ago, I visited my bank to withdraw money for repairs on my home. I discovered that my savings had disappeared. I laid the bank statement on the table. No one spoke. I placed the certified property records beside it. Later that same day, I returned home and found a sign in my front yard informing me that my house had been sold. I turned toward Ryan, keeping my voice calm. I did not approve that sale. Ryan's smile disappeared. Mom, he said quietly, this is not the right time. I looked at him with the same kindness I had shown him throughout his life. The right time was the day someone decided my future without asking me. I removed another document from the binder. These certified records show the transfer of my property. These bank statements show the movement of my savings. This timeline shows when each decision was made. I handed copies to James, who calmly distributed them to several close family members seated near the front. Murmurs slowly spread across the room as people compared dates and signatures. Ryan stepped closer, his face pale with disbelief. Mom, please let me explain. I nodded. I have wanted an explanation from the beginning. He lowered his head before speaking. I believed I was helping everyone. I thought selling the house would allow you to move closer to us. I thought we could replace the money later. I listened without interrupting. Then why did you tell everyone it was my idea? I asked softly. Ryan could not answer. Olivia slowly wiped tears from her eyes before speaking for the first time. Helen, I knew money was coming from somewhere, but I believed Ryan had your blessing. I never asked enough questions. I should have. Her voice trembled with regret. I appreciated her honesty, even though it came far too late. I closed the binder and rested both hands on it. This evening is not about embarrassing anyone, I said. It is about making sure the truth is no longer hidden behind good intentions. I looked once more at my son. Love never gives us permission to take another person's choices away from them. The ballroom remained silent. No one applauded. No one argued. Every guest understood they had witnessed something far more important than a wedding toast. They had witnessed the moment when truth quietly replaced appearances, and nothing inside that room would ever look the same again. The ballroom slowly returned to normal after the truth had finally been spoken. Some guests quietly stepped outside to make phone calls. Others remained seated, unsure whether they should leave or stay. The beautiful decorations that had filled the room with excitement now felt different. The flowers were still elegant. The music was still gentle. The wedding celebration was still surrounding us. Yet the story behind it had changed forever. I returned to my seat and placed the leather binder beside me. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel satisfied by seeing my son confronted. Instead, I felt the sadness of a mother who wished the conversation had never been necessary. Ryan remained near the front of the room for several minutes without saying anything. Eventually, he walked toward me and sat down quietly. The confidence he had carried earlier was gone. He looked like the little boy who used to ask me for advice whenever he faced a difficult decision. "Mom," he said softly, "I know I cannot undo what I did." I looked at him carefully. "No, Ryan, you cannot change the past, but you can decide what kind of person you become after facing it." He nodded slowly. Over the next several weeks, everything changed. With James Collins guiding the process, we worked through the legal steps necessary to review the property transfer and financial decisions. Every document was examined carefully. Every transaction was questioned. The process was not quick, and it was not easy, but patience mattered more than emotion. Richard Benson helped organize the financial records, and together we created a clear picture of what had happened. Some decisions could be corrected. Some consequences would remain. That was the reality we had to accept. Ryan and Olivia also faced difficult conversations of their own. The wedding plans they had created around my resources had to be reconsidered. They returned several arrangements and adjusted their expectations. For the first time, Ryan had to understand that responsibility meant more than explaining why a choice seemed reasonable. It meant accepting the impact of that choice on someone else. Our relationship did not immediately return to what it had been. Trust does not rebuild itself because someone says they are sorry. It grows slowly through consistent actions. Ryan began calling regularly, not to ask for help or discuss his problems, but simply to check how I was doing. He visited my home, which was still mine after all the uncertainty, and helped repair the garden fence that had been damaged during the property inspections. Small actions became the foundation of something new. As for me, I learned lessons I never expected to learn from my own family. Love does not mean allowing someone else to make every decision for you. Being a parent does not mean giving up your voice when your children become adults. And kindness does not require ignoring the truth. Several months later, I sat on my front porch watching the same street where I had once seen a sold sign beside my mailbox. The flowers I had planted years earlier were blooming again. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, but I was not the same woman who had walked out of that bank carrying an envelope full of painful surprises. I was stronger, not because I had avoided heartbreak, but because I had faced it with patience and dignity. Ryan visited that afternoon and sat beside me quietly. After several minutes, he said, "I know I hurt you in a way I may never fully understand." I looked at my son and answered honestly, "What matters now is not pretending it never happened. What matters is making sure it never happens again." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, the silence between us felt peaceful instead of painful. I still think about that day when I discovered my life had been changed without my permission. At first, I believed I had lost everything. I lost my sense of security. I lost the version of my son I thought I knew. I lost the comfort of believing that love alone could protect me from disappointment. But I gained something equally important. I gained the courage to stand up for myself. I gained the wisdom to ask questions. And I learned that even when trust is broken, a person can still choose honesty, grace, and a new beginning. Because the most valuable thing we own is not a house, a bank account, or anything that can be taken away. It is the strength to protect our own worth and continue moving forward with peace.